So 19 people were hurt, 5 were killed, and among the dead was a 3-year-old little girl right there in this very top together. So that's one of the places you should start looking around on the internet.
Was it great? Yeah.
Of the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment and 1 battalion of the 506, whose mission was to take some bridges that we're going to see later on today. There's a full regiment of German paratroopers that was located 10 kilometers south of Caretan, and these guys were really interesting for many reasons. One of the reasons is that you some pretty gruesome details, but when you look at the bed, 5-10 minutes, you walk around, you can walk around the cemetery, you can imagine all the fighting that took place. My name is Jack Hamlin, and he would like to say a couple of words to you.
Thank you. Gentlemen, this is really a pleasure. Now, this home where you're standing right now has been my pleasure to stay here for the last 2 years. It's owned by the Chapmans. I become friends with them 2 years ago. They put me in a bed where Colonel Sink of the Band of Brothers used to sleep. And I can't sleep at night thinking about the Colonel looking at me, because I never did like officers. It's just too bad. But my duty was, and the U.S. Coast Guard was taken over by the Navy in November 1941. President Roosevelt cutters, 83 foot long, with 13 members of crew. We were divided up with the 5 beaches, the 60 Coast Guard cutters. My cutter was 15 of us, went to Omaha Beach with the 29th Infantry. Our duty was nothing more to be but lifeguards, as I call myself. We had the water get blown up, a shell hits them, somebody's in the water, injured or drowning. That's when you go in to rescue them. I was 150 pounds. We had 2 boys, my son, and a line held us. We went overboard and into the water, pulling the boys out of the water to our Coast Guard cutter. And we'd put them on board, and we'd take them 10 miles out to the hospital ships. They kept the hospital ships, of course, 10 miles out because of the German shell. Our little cutter, that day in 5 hours, we saved close between 50 and 75. I don't know exactly what they were. Of course, a lot of them were dead. You didn't fool with them. Terrible to say. But we would take the injured as far as we could. We did make 2 trips back and forth. On the second trip, we had to quit. We caught something underneath our prop. We went back went back. But to tell you, again, we did a job. We saved, on the day, 1,500 American soldiers out of the water. 1,500. We saved 1 female nurse, not our cutter, but there was a British nurse that was blown off an LST, and one of our Coast Guard cutters saved her. But we feel we did our job. Thank you, and God bless all of you. Very best friend of mine, Dr. Tom McDonald, went to college with, was on 29. Any other questions? Be glad to answer anything. I'll tell you one more story. Christmas Eve. I said, that's just fine. He said, I'll bring the 2 French nurses down. I'll bring some turkey and I'll bring some wine. We'll have a party. Which I did. I let them have a little duty at the window. A transport was in trouble 5 miles off Cherbourg. This transport was the Leopoldville. It had 2,200 members of the 66th Black Panther Division aboard. Well, we got the orders to go out. Of all things, to me, I didn't think, I took the 2 nurses and put them on shore. We could use them that day very well. I asked the sergeant, would he go with us? We went out to the Leopoldville at 5 miles, and this night we saved about 50 before they drowned off the Leopoldville. We lost 850 soldiers that night of the Black Panther Division on Christmas Eve. But that's just another thing that was our job to do, the Coast Guard, so I think we did a good job.
All this has been accomplished. Most of the lost paratroopers are trying to get back to the units. All of the regiments of the 101st are establishing a front line based on this river over here. So June 8th, you got all the way down here, you have the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment, then the 501st, then the 506 is very much in this area in Saint-Côme-du-Mont, and the 502nd is all the way up, again along that river that makes like a curve all the way up north. So that's the front line. All objectives have been obtained, and comes the order to take Caretan. Why take Caretan? Because front line over here, so the bridgehead for Utah Beach extend all the way to Montebourg up north, with the objective of taking Cherbourg, which is a big harbor, objective to be taken quickly. So most of the troops that landed in Utah are looking at Cherbourg. Nobody is looking in the south, except the 101st, which is on this river. This causeway here, which stands about 3 meters above the marshes, number 1, which is the farthest, the northern bridge, and they're going to charge that command post at the bayonet. So the famous bayonet charge by Lieutenant Colonel Robert Cole. Happy morning, they had a head count for just over 110 men. All the others casualties, dead and everything. They even had the German Air Force, which if you look into all the big movies, was supposedly totally non-existent during D-Day, but that's not true, because the Luftwaffe was here, and during the night of June 10 and 11, as the troopers are trying to take cover, take some rest over here, along that road over here, the German Luftwaffe showed up with 2 Stuka, and they dropped bombs, and they strafed the highway for a good hour. So again, lots of casualties. There's the item company started out with something like 80 men, and there were like 12 men left in the evening of June the 11th. So 1st Battalion of 5th had to take over, and then eventually they had to call for 2nd Battalion, again just to take that little piece of land here and beyond bridge number 4. Bridge number 4, you can hardly see it, but it's right next to the big roundabout where we're going to go after this. Of June 11th man post over here. The order was not really received in it, and they charged right into this axis right here to the German command post here. Eventually other soldiers, seeing that people are to go this time way due south towards Caretan, and that's another fighting with hedgerow to hedgerow, hand-to-hand fighting, grenades over the hedgerow, really tough fighting going on during the entire day of June 11th. And by the time in June the days are very long, so it's daylight up until almost 11 p.m. So almost until 11 p.m. it's been a lot of fighting going on here. At noon the Americans called for truce because there were so many wounded, both sides, German and American side, and they called for a truce, and they had medics coming in with jeeps. They finally cleared the bridge over there, and they sent jeeps, and they tried to pick up all the wounded that they could. There's a small anecdote that this one guy, a lieutenant in Company C called Swanson, he didn't hear about the truce. So all of a sudden there were no more firing, so I said, oh, that's great. So we kept on running far beyond the command post there, thinking, hey, I'm doing well. And eventually 4 German Fallschirmjäger, they jumped him, they tied him up, and after a couple of hours they released him. Just an anecdote to tell you that even the fighting was terribly brutal. Once you were waving a white flag, but the Germans, at least they were respecting that. Not all the Germans, but in this case, those German Fallschirmjäger, they did. So that's for the day until June 11th. So as you can tell, Caretan is still very far away. Still a lot of casualties in only this one regiment, the 502nd, which is only going to take from then on a very small part in the liberation of the city, because they're just totally annihilated. They're going to bring, as I said, the 1st Battalion is going to fight over here, but not going to get too far. 2nd Battalion, 502nd is going to take over the 3rd Battalion, which is totally exhausted over here. But once you're here, you're very much nowhere. The objective was to circle Caretan, because at the time all this fighting was taking place June 9th, 10th and 11th. At the same time, the High Command decided to send 2 other regiments of the 101st Airborne. That's the 327 Glider Infantry Regiment, which landed at Omaha. They didn't have enough gliders to come in by gliders, so that entire regiment actually landed in Omaha by LSTs. He was told by some medic or some doctor that France was full of fleas, and that if you were going to get a head wound, you'd better get your head shaved, you know, to be more practical in case you get wounded. And you know, France being so many diseases and everything around, you know, you better have a clean head if ever you jump into France. So this guy, a few hours before boarding, he started to shave his head. And all his friends, you know, who were looking up to him, they came up and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And this guy happened to have a grandmother who was Indian. And, you know, he was full of imagination, and he came up with the idea, well, listen, we Indians, you know, when we go to war, we use war paints, and we have our special war haircut. So instead of shaving totally his head, he decided to have a mohawk haircut. And, you know, before you know, all of these guys said, "Hey, I want to have that haircut as well. You know, I want to go into combat with a real warrior haircut." And as you know, the planes, all of the planes involved in the invasion on D-Day, they had what they called invasion stripes. To avoid this, in Normandy, they decided to paint those big white and black stripes. And they did that a few days before D-Day. So our friend is shaving his head, and he looks at the pictures, which is fresh. So he takes some of the white and black paints, and he makes like war paints on his face. So all these guys, they jumped into Normandy with mohawk haircuts and war paints, except for before D-Day. But they scrapped that a few days before D-Day. They forgot about this. So he said, "Hey, if I can be a ranger, I want to be a paratrooper." So he went to Chilton Foliat, where they had his jumps. Jack Hamlin. Oh, we have this monument here for these guys who did not really... over there, so that had to be taken as well. And that mission came to the 3rd Battalion of the 506, so they jumped very much in this area over there. Thank you very much anyway. Thank you, Dennis.
There they go. Oh, we don't know them.